Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the 185th session of the online Optom Learning Series, OOLS. And for today's session, we have with us joining all the way from the US, Dr. Justin Kwan. It's a Saturday night for him. He has been at the conference at Vision by Design, and he has taken out his time again and going to share with us his thoughts about myopia. Dr. Kwan is a 2009 graduate of the Berkeley School of Optometry, and currently he is a full-time employee as a senior manager for myopia management at Vision. He's involved in giving lectures and continued education for over 100 hours in and out of America as well. And he holds a couple of other positions, has been an editor-in-chief of the Clinical and Refractive Optometry, has also been a past chair of the fellows doing research at the special interest group of the Academy. And he's also a member of the Interpret Eye Society. So welcome, Dr. Kwan. Thank you so much, for joining in. I would like to mention, apart from all the education support we get from our supporters, this session is also supported by Vision. So thank you so much for bringing in these thoughts, and let me just leave the screen time to you.
Oh, thank you, Fakruddin, and the whole team at the OOLS. I really enjoy being with colleagues from around the world. And another thing about, having optometry students on, I used to be a professor at the optometry school in Southern California. And even in my role right now, it's all teaching and learning together. There's a saying that says, to teach is to learn twice. So we will all do this together, and I'm very excited to share some of what I've learned from some of the brightest minds around the world. You might recognize some of these names. I want to give a lot of credit to, Dr. Maria Liu, Professor Mark Bullimore, even here at the conference, sitting next to Kevin Chan, who has been a past speaker. But we really want to focus our time at the beginning, because we cannot end myopia completely ever, knowing the prevalence is so high, but we need to start at the very beginning, meaning young children. And so you'll see that theme throughout tonight or this afternoon as well. So I kind of think of all of us in the exam room, when we talk about the nearsightedness, the prescription, and how the prescription has changed or increased, and our patients may look at us with, does that mean thicker glasses? How thick will they be? Can I get the thinner lens options, right? Or they may just think, oh, I wear contact lenses, it's time for my minus number to change or to go up, right? Or to get more minus. They may not say it like that, but all of us know that myopia actually means the eye is longer than it should be. And it's something that I even teach my children just for fun, because they're 4 and 6 years old. They don't have myopia yet. But yes, when we put these images side by side, the symptom of blurry distance vision is a byproduct of the longer eye. And that's, we'll think about how to say that a little differently as we talk to more patients. Everybody knows the Brian Holden number, so I'm just going to focus in on Southern California, which would be an urban setting. Urban settings have a lot more myopia prevalence. There are 61,000 pediatric eye exams in this cross-sectional data set. And I believe about 15-20% Asian. So there's a 42% prevalence. The Brian Holden for North America happens to be 58%. So you can see that even though we're 30 years away from 2050, these prevalence numbers are already reaching the 50% level. Earlier this year at the ARVO conference, I was able to work with the ophthalmologist, and we used in the United States the census data. I think this time all the families and individuals responded digitally online about their household, where they live, certain things like that. And so if we know the rural prevalence is much lower than the urban, there's a paper referenced here, 2.61 times difference. We made an estimate that 19.5 million will have myopia in the United States by the year 2050. actually in the year 2020, and 36% would be the prevalence. Now, in the United States, there's 48,000 optometrists. Not all of them see patients, and there are 22,000 ophthalmologists. And we know the glaucoma retinal specialists, they will not see children and help in this myopia management effort. But even if they did, we're just thinking this idea, each eye doctor would have 278 children to take care of. So that's a rather large number, but it's a nice thing if you're in one practice, in one setting. Have you managed this many children with myopia yet? So I'll do my first poll. It's a two-part question. If for the clinicians and even for the students in clinic, how many kids age 5 to 17 do you examine in an average day? And then the next question, you can select as many modalities or treatments that you do. So even if you only use atropine for 2 children a year, or if you only do 1 ortho-K or 12 ortho-K, you can mark the box as many treatments as you do. I know luckily in Asia and other markets outside of the US, there are many more spectacle lens options, and we cannot wait for the day that the FDA approves the spectacle lens options. So once we get about 10 more responses, we'll share the results. I know the sad part is here in the United States, the average doctor only sees less than 3 kids a week. And we know from the population data, they should see 3 kids a day, not 3 kids a week. So I already see many of you seeing those numbers. So that's really encouraging. I know based on the regulations and the laws and the scope of practice each optom can do, not all of us can prescribe, let's say, low-dose atropine. So thankfully you guys can, seems like. All right. And many of you may be familiar with the International Myopia Institute, formed quite a few years ago, taking the brightest minds, clinicians and PhDs, clinician scientists, really put their heads together to publish very comprehensive, lengthy reports, the scientific review of the literature. And only a couple years after the first one came the second one, which is, if I compare to dry eye, there were many years, I think 10 years between DEWS 1 and DEWS 2 for a similar global efforts to share the best science on myopia. And so we know that many hundreds of publications, maybe even thousands, are being published about myopia every single year. We'll talk first about the syndromic or perhaps genetic variants of high myopia. A good rule of thumb others have come up with is that if your myopia level is more than your age, then that may not be your typical school-aged myopia. It might behave differently. It's not as well studied, and we cannot draw the same conclusions or generalizability, right? So Stickler's has a few different forms. I think type 2 is most at risk for macula off detachments, may even require prophylactic laser. Quite rare, but connective tissue disorder. Marfan's 1 in 5,000, and some systemic potential complications as well as the intraocular lens, maybe the crystalline lens, I should say, might be dislocated. And then very rare is the homocystinuria, but also some quite alarming systemic complications. So not an exhaustive list, but yeah, if the child is quite young, 5, 6, 7 years old, and they're -10, that's not your normal type of myopia here. But I would also like to highlight, of course, keratoconus. Illinois College of Optometry, they have served elementary school system and these students that are aged 5 to 19. And it was really good to see in the red box how just by delivering eye exams and eyewear, vision correction, they have better performance on their testing. But in that same school setting in Chicago, they brought a pentacam to measure the anterior, posterior floats and tomography of all of these children as well. And so I know historically the keratoconus prevalence is 1 in 2,000. The Dutch data in their national health system is 1 in 375. But in this Chicago study, there was nearly 5% that were suspicious of keratoconus, and they need to look a little further. I don't think it's as high as 5%, probably between 0.5 and 1%, which is still much higher than previously thought. And there's likely some socioeconomic ethnicity components to that. So all that to say, when you have a increasing myopic prescription, baseline corneal topography would be a good thing to do to see if the keratometry values are steepening or just the axial length or a little bit of both, and really take a look at the astigmatism, whether it's regular or irregular. But yeah, let's think about the parents again, and we're always going to come back to the parents, and the child is very important as well. But in 2019, the Harris poll, 1,000 parents who had children age 8 to 15 were surveyed, and only 1 in 3 could define myopia, like what it really was. And at the UAB School of Optometry, Dr. Andrew Pucker and colleagues, they found that if you use the term nearsightedness or short-sightedness with the parents, then 64% could actually, know what it is and be able to describe it back to you, so they know the definition. The Global Myopia Awareness Coalition, love the word global, right? It's again a global and a World Council of Optometry effort here. The WCO passed the resolution a year and a half ago that declared myopia management as standard of care. But at the country and local level, still many practitioners do not believe the science is strong, do not believe that it's standard of care. So quite a few years ago, the GMAC, they surveyed 4,000 parents. And unfortunately, these parents, in their mind, that getting an eye exam for their child is less important than bringing their child to the dentist and pediatrician. So a lot of work and awareness and education still to be done. These parents, nearly 27%, said they took their child to see an eye doctor. So not enough. I wish that number were 90% or more. And about half believe their pediatrician could conduct an eye exam. And I live this every day as well, right? Because my college friends who are highly educated, many of them know I'm an optometrist, and they think also that a pediatrician can do a full eye exam, when we know that's not true at all. And this very famous Karlazatnik paper from the CLEAR data set tells us a little bit about parental contribution to myopia. If you have 2 parents with myopia, that's 7.73 times increased odds that the child will have it. But we also know that it's a very valid point. Parents with myopia are probably raising children in myopic lifestyles, maybe higher demands on education, achievement, as well as maybe less outdoor time. So it may not be fully a genetic contribution there. We know that from this paper, the strongest contributor out of over a dozen different types of factors evaluated is the level of cycloplegic autorefraction. So if you don't have enough hyperopia, the term is now being used pre-myopia. You're at increased risk of developing myopia in the very near future because the fastest rate of myopia progression is the year they develop myopia. They might go from +1 down to -0.75. And that's a 1.75 shift, right? It's a very fast changes in the 1 or 2 years preceding that myopic refraction. So we created something that kind of covers this data set in the pink box. You may be able to see. I was able to take some US and Chinese data to plot the orange line. And it's just a great conversation starter because the very left on the purple vertical line is age 1. On the very far right-hand side is age 18. And so you really should not be happy to deliver the news that the child is plus 0.25 at age 3. They should really be plus 1.25 and so on and so forth. So children should be farsighted under cycloplegic conditions here, right? So we're talking about myopia onset now. You know, when I was born in 1983, supposedly the average onset was age 11. And in the year 2000, which already is 22 years ago, the average age onset was 8 years old. And I imagine in many parts of the world, it's as young as 4, 5, 6 years old now. And the younger they are, the faster they progress. The y-axis tells us what's the annual progression rate for that age. Age 7 is about a -1. Age 8 is a minus, you know, 0.8, maybe close to -1. So I was actually this child. In my second grade, -2, third grade, -3, fourth grade, -4, and became -10, as you all know. And if they do have the early age of onset, more than a 50% chance to develop -5 or worse, and likely in Asia, right, going up to -9, 10, 11. So now we'll talk about the disease risk contributions that you may already be aware of. This meta-analysis really looked at 13 studies to connect myopia to the risk of glaucoma. As a whole, it's about a 2 times increased odds. But there is a difference between low and high myopia, as you see there. And so that's an important point to note. Actually, I might do the second poll question now, because I think this will connect best with our next topics of myopic maculopathy and so on. So, what is your personal spherical equivalent prescription? If you've had LASIK, please put your pre-LASIK spherical equivalent. And the second part is that outside of age, I know age is a very important thing, but what prescription would you start prescribing myopia management? I'll tell you, many optoms here in the US, they are still waiting to see if there's progression before they start treating. But there's, of course, that problem is twofold, right? Because any progression that happens, you cannot take it back. You cannot make a -2 back into a -1. And we know from many data sets, I'll reference one here, 96% of eyes with myopia get worse. 96% of the time. And so we talk to parents about your child is growing, and so their eye is growing. Their eye is getting worse if they have this myopia. Yeah. All right, let's try to get about 5 more responses, and then we'll share the results. Looks like most of us are emmetropia or -1 to 275. Yeah, which does actually reflect the population. It skews towards more mild state, right? Mild myopia, if you will. So yeah, it's great to see. Yeah, 24 attendees here tonight would start between -0.5 and -125. You're already doing much better than some of the doctors I work with. There's always some that are waiting till -3, and that's much, much too late, because you've heard Mark Bullimore say every diopter matters, right? Every single diopter increases the risk of myopic maculopathy by 67%. All right. So back to the glaucoma connection to myopia. Dr. Biswas, he was doing his PhD in Hong Kong at a LASIK center, and we know LASIK candidates are generally on the younger side, average age of 32, 36 here. The groups were divided into high and mild to moderate myopia. And I do want to highlight the average RNFL thickness here is about 4 microns different. We know these normative databases do not have a high representation of ethnic groups of high myopia. We have issues of tilted optic nerves as well, but we naturally lose about 1.5 microns every year we grow older. So if you think about it that way, the high myopia RNFL is 3 years older than the mild to moderate. So even though 4 microns does not seem like much, it is quite significant when we are already losing microns of RNFL thickness. What's even more sobering is that 5% of these individuals had visual field defects. And these, again, are young, very young patients. And so it was a very good study that I met him at ARVO, saw the publication a few years later. Okay, myopic maculopathy is the most concerning. Many of you answered there you were -1 to 2.99, so you have a 2.2 times increased odds of myopic maculopathy compared to, I guess, emmetropia or lower myopia. I'm in the high bucket, the 350 times increased odds. The odds ratios are a little bit hard to understand sometimes though, right? They look very dramatic, but I like to think of the prevalence. So I've done the math for you. If you are -4, you have a 2% chance of visual impairment due to myopic maculopathy here. And so, yeah, it's a little bit frightening once you get to the higher levels. Take a look at the dotted or the dashed line. The triangle represents retinal detachment. And so we know that on the x-axis with more myopia, yes, you have more chance or higher odds of getting a retinal detachment. 1 in 10,000 is the baseline. So if you multiply by that, 10 in 10,000 is 1 in 1,000. But take a look at the solid line. That's the myopic maculopathy. That continues going up very quickly on this logarithmic scale, even surpassing retinal detachment odds ratios, which is why we're always concerned this can affect an adult. Let's think of a 48-year-old who's about to get a promotion at the work, maybe watching their children play sports, and they may have to live half of their life with visual impairment. That's why we're so concerned about myopic maculopathy. It's permanent, it's irreversible. So in this study that followed patients with myopia for 18 years, you can see the pathologic cohort that has retinal signs that are worse than tessellated fundus. I draw that red line down here. That categorizes them as pathologic. You can see there's some choroidal neovascularization in a subset of those patients. This permanent visual loss, average visual acuity of 20/50. Yeah, having lost 4 lines from 20/20. And again, these are young patients, 48 years old, as young as 7, as old as 76. And so we want to avoid this at all costs. As much as we appreciate our low vision colleagues, if we can start at the beginning, right, that theme of the talk tonight, we can minimize the chance that these things will happen is the end goal, and how we all work together for that. So we'll take 2 minutes to just fly around the world a little bit. In the Netherlands, myopic maculopathy is the leading cause of impaired vision. Italy and Taiwan, the second most common cause of low vision. And we said this already. It oftentimes could be bilateral, asymmetric, but really the irreversible nature of this, you can't supplant and, produce more photoreceptors once the damage has been done with all that central atrophy. And these patients are in their most productive years. So did they go on disability? Does the spouse, the wife or the husband have to start working 2 jobs, and really a very high impact on the family? In the University of Southern California, there was a Chinese-American eye study. Dr. Rohit Varma had also done a Latino eye study, but we'll do the Chinese data on this one. There's a community called Monterey Park and the surrounding areas where you can see 4,000 participants at least 50 years old. Age-related macular degeneration, 8%, but the 1,500 myopes, nearly 1 out of 3 had myopic macular degeneration. So for every millimeter that the eye gets longer, that's a 2.6 greater odds of myopic maculopathy. So you don't have to memorize any of these numbers. You just know that they're double digits, they're very high, and they will really affect eye care and public health, right? Across the ocean in Taiwan, 2,000 elderly Chinese. You can see 12.5% with myopic macular degeneration. Not quite as high, but still, double digits again. So we'll kind of pivot now to axial length, right? Because we know this is the disease risk that's conferred with the longer eyes. Every millimeter matters as well. This very famous paper, you can start to divide these groups. Shorter than 26 millimeters, 4% chance of visual impairment. Longer than 26 millimeters, 25% chance of visual impairment. As a surrogate for 26 millimeters, if you don't have an axial length device, -6 roughly. Let's just think about an average keratometry value. So yeah, this is something we have to really think seriously about because I think a lot of our colleagues, again, are like, what's the big deal about -6? Or many of our patients are like, at least by -6, I can still see clearly in my contact lenses and glasses. And now we have to do the good work for their children, their children's children as well. And there's the numbers I just mentioned. Okay. So let's go to the time outdoors. This is a poster at Arvo in the Cebu, Philippines. In the rural parts of the surrounding areas, they were roughly age matched, not quite, within a half year of average age. But the prevalence in the rural parts was 3%. In the city, due to multifactorial, 12.5% prevalence. So maybe less outdoor time, more near work, higher education, and all those things together. And this is a large data set of nearly 1,300 children. By sending the kids outside, the systematic review and meta-analysis tells us if you try to increase the child's time outdoors by 7 hours a week or an hour a day, you can reduce the risk of incident myopia by about 50% there. So that's good. Their conclusion was very specific of 76 minutes added per day. But I always say, whatever the child is doing right now, if it's 15 minutes or 30 minutes outside at school, just try to do one more outdoor activity for at least 15, 30 minutes. Try to build it up. Try to get as close to 2 hours a day as you can, knowing that, it's not super realistic, just like warm compresses for dry eye. But here's another support point for 2 hours a day. This shows us in blue 2 myopic parents and the chance the child will develop myopia to be 60% if they're only outdoors 0 to 5 hours a week. Once you get to 2 hours a day or 14 hours a week, you can essentially cancel out the genetic contribution of 1 or 2 myopic parents. So that's really the nurture over the nature. It's just so exciting that you can overcome the genetics. So what is it about being outside? Dopamine is released in the presence of bright light. Even in a dark room like this, or even on a cloudy day, outdoors is typically 100 times brighter than inside. Now, dopamine in the presence of bright light cascades a signal through the retina in the choroid, and that regulates the growth, the axial elongation. Dopamine happens to be a strong stop signal for axial elongation. And I'll show you a very well-respected paper about that. But first, let's give a real-life example. Here's that cloudy day outside the optometry practice. 31,000 lux units of light. Indoors, 253. Even when you wear sunglasses outside, it's still going to be 10 times brighter than inside. So still protect your eyes from ultraviolet by wearing sunglasses. But this is a free light meter if you have a phone and want to try this yourself. Now, here's the paper, right? So if we put tracers on the dopamine activity, look at all of the activity in the bright lights on the right-hand side. So during the emmetropization process, the D2R activity, when there's not enough bright light, tips the scales towards myopia. And when you have enough bright light, we then lean towards hyperopia, if you will. And so that's the complexity of what's happening at the retina, choroid, and scleral level. Now, tied with being outside and the light levels themselves, there actually is a seasonal variation. So myopia progresses faster in the winter. This is from the COMET study. You can look at the diopters every 6 months, and in January, February, and so on, the average there is quite a bit more than in the spring, summer months. In fact, that holds true when you stratify by age, more progression in the winter, less in the summer. And it more or less holds true except for Asian ethnicity. Again, maybe the lifestyle of Asian parents raising Asian kids couldn't quite tease out that difference. But you do see that in the other ethnicities represented here. Going to Europe, this is the Czech Republic, represented in the blue box, shows us that 77% of children had more axial elongation in the winter compared to the summer. So it's an interesting way to separate this data, either yes or no, for winter more than summer, winter less than summer. But that's another proof point for this concept. We'll briefly go through a couple of population-based studies. We know that outdoor time is actually not related to vitamin D levels in its influence on myopia. But by sending them outside, even if it's just an average day, if you're more than 3 hours a day, you can reduce the incident myopia by 31%. You just subtract the 0.69 from 1 to get that reduction of 31%. Many of us on our devices now have probably switched to dark mode, the black background with the white text, a little bit easier on the eyes, maybe saves a little battery life. But we know that the choroid is actually a biomarker, if you will, on response to treatments. We'll go over, atropine, soft lenses, ortho-K, and so on. But yeah, if you look at this graph in 30 and 60 minutes, there's a thickening by switching to dark. And you might think, well, isn't dark less light? Isn't that bad? You just told me bright light is good. But there are these on and off signals in the retina that somehow with dark mode, you get this choroidal thickening. So not a cause and effect sort of thing, but it could be protective if we even do anything at all, and if you believe in the eye strain benefits. And so, yeah, when we look across the literature, yes, the parents would like us to be the ones that tell the children to be off of their screens. But time and time again, there's not a strong association, 7%, 8% in regards to near work and screen time. So the outdoor time, like sending them outside, is a larger effect size. It's more powerful. It's more helpful for the children than just cutting back on the screen time. But with that said, you still want to increase their working distance, making sure they're not holding their smartphones at 18 centimeters. Do not hold the books and do not lean their head on the table when they're doing their work. This device is able to measure working distance and light levels. So from this study by Longbo Wen, we know that these increase the risk of myopia progression. So keep them in more bright light, make sure their working distance is 30 centimeters. A practical way is that if they need to do any homework, try to do it on a desktop computer, not a laptop, not a tablet, and so on and so forth. So with axial length, at least here in the United States, I think you all also have these similar devices like the IOL Master, LensStar, Oculus Myopia Master, Topcon, Aladdin Maya. Here is just a brief video of how you can take data points and plot them, see what the trend is like before, during, post-treatment, and all of those things. This is a fairly recent publication. The data was gathered in April and May 2021, surveying orthokeratology practitioners. 545 responded to this survey, and you may think of ortho-K fitters as early adopters. They were very early to myopia management, so they were more likely to purchase an axial length device. But even knowing that, pretty exciting to see that, or it might surprise you that half of them monitor axial length. Another practice management benefits for doing orthokeratology is that these patients stay with the doctor on average 8 years. That's a very long time. They don't leave the practice, go to another one. They kind of stay loyal to you as their ortho-K fitter. This is from the Tiedemann graphs. Males and females are slightly different, and we're all trying to get them below that danger line of 26 millimeters by the time they reach adulthood, or I always think about age 18, right? So let's just, for example, say there's a child on the purple diamond. They're on the 73 percentile growth curve. Let's say you start treatment. The goal is to move them off of the high percentile towards the lower. And so if you see them every 6 months and you see that they are now flattening and going downwards, that is a good thing. And that's a response to treatment you can talk about, right? So I know I kind of gave away the answer on screen a little bit, but what is the rate of emmetropic eye growth? It's going to be a little bit age dependent. So if you could answer this question for me. And we know from many different studies that as these children grow, the crystalline lens gets thinner and flatter. So that's why emmetropes, their eyes can grow, in fact, 1 millimeter over 10 years, and yet they remain emmetropic because the crystalline lens thinning and flattening compensates for that eye growth. So yes, I will move right along in the interest of time here. Yes, 0.1 millimeters per year. So the younger children, younger than age 10, they grow about 0.2 as emmetropes. And then in their 11, 12, and teenage years, then they start growing 0.1, 0.09, 0.08 as emmetropes. Myopes, they grow a lot faster, don't they? Yeah. Okay, so many different ways to plot this. This is my son. I hope to keep him in the yellow. He's that little black dot right there. Once we get into the red, that's when we're crossing 26 millimeters. And I think our treatment goal should be making sure they finish high school or age 18 no higher than -3. Remember, every diopter matters for myopic maculopathy risk. And we know -3 adults make good candidates for LASIK, and they may even have a hyperopic shift in their 20s and 30s, making an even better presbyope for quality of life and still not be fully dependent on their glasses every waking hour. So here are the scleral fibers that are uniquely different. They're weaker. They're thinner and weaker when you have myopia in the B and C here. So I put this belt buckle kind of picture here because we want to think about two situations. You could have a 10-year-old -175 who's 24.4 millimeters, and then you could have a 10-year-old plano who might have really flat corneas and he's a 25.7. Okay, so which is more at risk? Well, the 25.7 is closer to 26, but that is this person's, starting point, if you will. The sclera is strong. It is strong at 25.7. So the stretching after your baseline is what causes the increased risk. It's the stretching that thins the retina and all those important structures. So yes, it's not all about 26 millimeters. It's the change in time with the accelerated myopic eye growth. So as we dive now into the treatments, I want to kind of draw your attention to this study where you see the corneal higher order aberrations increase to the right, and then the change in axial length on the left, on the y-axis. So what this is showing us is that if you have more aberrations, your axial length actually does not grow as fast. It actually grows more slowly. And so these optical interventions induce aberrations in many ways, and that is one of the mechanisms of slowing eye growth beyond myopic defocus and really signaling the retina in many different ways. You may have seen this IMI infographic. It kind of is a very nice summary of our talk tonight. So yes, different efficacies for different treatments. We know the common study said progressive addition lenses only confer 0.2 diopters of benefit in the first year, and then the lines are very parallel. So they don't have incrementally more benefit in year 2 and year 3. This is from Myopia Profile and Kate Gifford and her team. So we will briefly talk about, DIMS and Stellest and sight glass vision here. This is out of Hong Kong, of course. Now they have a 3-year data set. A bit of a rescue treatment, right? That the control group was switched to DIMS, and you saw that benefit later on. Really nice efficacy there in Hong Kong children. This is the initial sight glass data. This is the DOT technology, diffusion optics. You can see on the right-hand side, even though we're in a very short duration of period, you can see the benefits in microns per day, a lot less growth with the treatment of sight glass. Okay, so this is what it sort of looks like from an angle. It's not as obvious as this. The 2-year data shows us that you can save 0.77 diopters in the children that started at age 6 to 7. and about 0.27 millimeters of axial length, which is great. Anything more than 0.1 per year of savings is good. So here we have about 0.13 of savings per year, totaling 0.27 millimeters. So yeah, thinking back on what that means for a child that's approaching 25, 26 millimeters. The Essilor Stellus saved about a diopter. This is from the Chinese study. 9 out of 10 children had emmetropic growth, if you will. So very nice efficacy here. Good adaptation. You already know the ATOM study quite well, where there's the higher rebound effect in the higher concentration. And so we'll go into that a little bit more deeply. The LAMP study, I want to draw your attention that this is starting at age 4 to 12 years old at the beginning. As they grew older through the study, dose-dependent response, higher concentration is better. You can see that 0.05% at the 1-year mark reduced the rate of myopia progression by about half. The placebo at 0.41 down to 0.2. So here's the figures representing that. The placebo was switched to 0.05% after year 1, and that was great because then their annual growth for year 2 was 0.15, much more where they should be for emmetropic eye growth. I do want to caution, though, that between these ATOM and LAMP studies, there was a fairly high non-response rate, meaning either the Asians were rapidly progressing, but these are the rates of more than a diopter of progression in 2 years. Hopefully we see 50 going down to 25 or 25 going to 0, but yeah, a diopter in 2 years is okay, but it's not ideal when every diopter matters. So just know, you've already know to not use 0.01% anymore, but yes, based on the pharmacokinetics, there's likely a fairly high non-response rate and you get continued diopters of progression. Yeah, in the United States, this study is wrapping up next summer, nearly 500 subjects. It'll be very exciting to see. This is one of the compounding pharmacies to get the LAMP, concentrations. We know that there will be about 1 millimeter or more of pupillary dilation, particularly in the higher concentrations. But yes, 0.01% does not have the axial efficacy, so we should not be using that anymore. But contact lenses are very safe. These are data in soft for children. And the 8 to 12-year-olds, the youngest ones are safest. That's something we tell parents all the time. This is a retrospective chart review, and it was not the younger 8 to 12-year-olds. It was the teenagers, a 13 and 14-year-old with microbial keratitis. That is represented here in the yellow bar. Remember that these are so infrequent that we have to plot them against per 10,000 years. So if you have a parent that's very into the numbers, you can say, if your child lived 10,000 years, they may get 7 or 8 infections. Even Ortho-K is very safe at 14 and 10,000. Sleeping in soft lenses is the riskiest at 20 to 26 and 10,000. So Kate Gifford puts the risk side by side very nicely. Microbial keratitis, thankfully, does not always lead to permanent corneal scarring or vision loss, whereas visual impairments due to myopic maculopathy is very devastating. So to kind of begin to wrap up and get to our communication parts, we know that optical interventions are moving the image shell in front of the retina. Light is powerful, right? You see plants grow towards light. So hopefully the eye is also growing to where we put and move the peripheral light rays. The Ortho-K meta-analysis showed us, Asians kind of have a greater effect, and higher myopia gets a greater benefit because you're creating this maybe +5, +3 add in the periphery when you treat a -5 and a -3, which is exactly this patient of mine. You can see where the red is. Her 2 eyes had anisometropia, but where the red is roughly 3-5 diopters of add, if you will. This is a more recent study where you can see that the red had a period of shortening, and then it grew longer and longer. But then once the ortho-K was stopped, there was a bit of a rebound effect upon the discontinuation. And that was the same for the ortho-K children that grew from the beginning. So there can be shortening due to choroidal thickening in the first 6 to 9 months. And that's something that's exciting and we can watch for as well. Kind of skip ahead. This is the MySight data showing, again, that once you switch the orange control group over to the purple of MySight, you get an immediate benefit, and very similar to the children that got MySight from the very beginning. But a diopter of total change, which is fantastic. If you start at -2, 6 years later, maybe -3, but we should try to keep below -3 as our end goal here. I kind of mentioned this earlier, but if you look inside the purple circle, you can divide the two numbers and essentially say to a parent, your child has myopia. Their eyes are growing 2 to 3 times faster than they should be. And my job is to get their eye growth back on track. This type of growth is not good. You can say that any number of ways, right? The 7th year of the MySight study showed the discontinuation, and there was no evidence of rebound in the international study. It was not 0.15 or 0.16. It was just 0.1, right? As most teenagers are slowing down in their eye growth. So yes, we don't know if a child will be a fast progressor on the right, a slow progressor on the left, but 23% of these children, having had MySight for 6 years, were refractively stable. That means -2 in the beginning, no higher than 225 6 years later. That's a really nice odds, right, of strong efficacy. We never promise a parent to stop treatment or halt or stop progression, but sometimes we do achieve it, which is really exciting. So this really, again, shows us that by age 18, the natural slowing of getting older tells us that the MySight more or less stops. I want to kind of describe these young 8 and 9-year-olds kind of like a car going 100 kilometers per hour. If you step on the brakes really hard, you can't stop that car in 10 meters. It's going to take time and distance to safely bring that car, that automobile, to a stop. And so I find that analogy pretty relatable because you want to do this safely, efficaciously, right? And there's a lot of great data that you cut the progression in half, the space between the orange and the purple. And what's really nice about the MySight data set is that if you compare the pre-treatment growth on the x-axis to the in-treatment growth on the Y, it really shows us that 90% of eyes respond. And some of these eyes shortened. Everything below this magenta growth stops line is a shortening of the axial length. And this is, again, a 6-year period. It shows you 3 years before, 3 years during treatment. And the best part is the fastest growing eyes, like my own eyes, they benefit the most from MySight. You can see the size of that arrow going downwards. So here's just a case study of a child in MySight across nearly 2 years. And there are periods of shortening. Let me point that out. There was growth, then shorter, shorter, stable. On the left eye, there was stable, shorter, shorter, shorter. And so these dynamics in the sclera and the choroid, again, are very fascinating. And there's a very tight correlation between the change in diopters and the change in millimeters. So even if you don't have axial length, go ahead and get started, right? Because these children need your help now. And the correlation can help you if you're really careful on your retinoscopy and refraction, or using the red-green for your endpoint. And every child or every eye in the purple square shortens as well. Okay, I think I have one more poll question left. So we're going to jump ahead. In the US, we again surveyed 1,000 parents. What percent of parents do you think are worried about myopia? They may know a lot, they may know a little, or somewhere in between, right? So let's take a moment to answer this final poll question for this afternoon. We get about 10 more people to vote, and then it's a very close race between 24% and 37%.
Yeah, it's neck to neck, right?
Yeah, yes. Oh, we need somebody to break the tie. I guess it's staying. Oh, okay, there we go. The correct answer is 37%. So if you talk to the next three families in the clinic, and only one out of three say yes, that is okay for now, right? You can think about trying to treat meibomian glands in 10 adults, and maybe only two of them will pay for it, right? So we have a lot of work to do, but remember, our job is to stay consistent and to communicate well. But I do want to get to the communication part because this is where I truly have learned so much. So we'll skip the blink study. I think many of you know it works about 2/3 as well as good as MiSight. This is just a diagram about the 4 powers of bioaffinity multifocal. And then a design such as the Natural View EDOF, extended depth of focus. And then these are the MiSight dual focus optical designs. So a lot of questions still to be answered here. Yeah. Essentially, every treatment in red, this is on a 1-year basis though. So, the 7-year MiSight study, 3-year blink, 3 years for most of these other interventions after this meta-analysis was, published. You want to be in the green. You want something that saves at least 0.1 millimeters of axial growth per year. And so that would be atropine, Ortho-K, and some of these peripheral defocus soft multifocals, if you will. So many tools you're familiar with, and maybe setting some treatment goals if you have axial length. Want to cut these in half, right? So maybe an Asian child that's growing 0.4, let's try to drop that to 0.2 or better. This is Noel Brennan and Mark Bullimore, and I just kind of plotted things on top of it. Okay. So in your practice, you want to ask about the parents, if they're -7 or -1, if there's any brothers and sisters, time outdoors. How do we educate using visual aids, right? That's very important to show pictures like the one here. Uncorrected myopia, you can't even recognize faces or the stop sign or even the vehicles, maybe just hearing them, right? Baseline is very important, and you may have to talk to parents more than once or twice, and that's a very important thing. There are many great training videos. So I have 3 points about communication. I think if you think about how you talk about the prescription and what it's doing when there's been a myopic shift, you might use any of these words. The prescription got stronger, it went up, it increased, it changed, right? But sometimes even the parents ask you, how did it get worse, right? So I think we should be using the words, your prescription got worse, your myopia got worse, because when something is worse, we should want to make it better, right? But if something got stronger, you're like, is that a good thing? I don't know. Yeah. So again, describing the eye, showing a diagram, say it's longer than it should be, right? With diabetes, the blood sugar is higher than it should be, and saying this is concerning, but giving them great news that there is treatments, there's ways we can get this eye growth back on track, and your child will be so happy. They get to see clearly, and we get to treat the disease of their myopia. Last week, we had a child go into MiSight or Ortho-K. They're doing really well, so I think you can do it too. And the best time to start is when they're young, right? The end of myopia starts at the beginning. The best we can do is really hit this head on right at the beginning when they're youngest, because when the younger they are, the faster they progress. So it's really important to create curiosity. I'm going to rephrase now the purple bars, what you see there. What if instead of telling the parents and the child, the eye is longer than it should be, what if we said, did you know some eyes are longer than other eyes? So you ask a question instead of telling them information. Because when you ask a question, it makes them an active listener. They have to answer your question, and it might be interesting to them, right? It may be the first time they're hearing about it. It very likely is. And instead of saying, this is concerning, like, oh, it concerns the eye doctor, so if it concerns me, it should concern you. You might just say, what would happen if your child became this blurry and you show +4 simulating -4? Would this concern you? Again, asking a question, not assuming that it concerns them, because yeah, some parents are just not worried, remember? And then lastly, instead of saying, but great news, and say, would you be interested that there's something we can do about this, right? So you don't always have to ask questions, but that's how you create curiosity is you flip and ask a few questions and making sure that they remember what you say and they're not going to remember that much, right? 90% is going to be forgotten within the first 3 days. So you really have to give them something to take home. I know we don't want to use paper very much. We can email, we can text, we can share things, but still to this day, we should give them something physical like this brochure, give them a visual on Google Images, YouTube, and really try to talk a little bit differently about myopia. You might think of treatments such as AREDS, loteprednol for dry eye or anything, right? What kind of treating of systemic or eye disease would we say we could do something, we should do something, we must do something, we need to do something? I think the bottom two are fairly close in strength. And some parents, you might need to be a little bit more strong in the words that you use. In the US, we always say, we don't prescribe or we don't recommend, we prescribe, right? And ophthalmology does this all the time, right? Whatever they prescribe, that's what the patient does. I think optometry, at least in the US, we recommend anti-reflective coat or transitions, photochromic, we recommend, I always joke, appetizers or restaurants. We recommend good food, but we should really be prescribing our treatments here. So I think you all have subscribed to Myopia Profile and Review of Myopia Management. A lot of great information. Here's a picture of my family. We just took these last Sunday. So if you could help us out with infancy, age 3, age 5, age 6, getting 4 conversations about myopia. And we'll definitely do vision correction for children is no longer what we do. We need to treat the disease. So you might say to your team, all your colleagues, front of office, front of house, and all the doctors, our practice does not let myopia get worse. Our practice does not prescribe single vision to children that are growing. So it's really about eye health at the end of the day, because parents, the same Harris poll said 95% of parents care about eye health, but why are only 3% of children in myopia management? So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, for sharing that with us. And this was really great. And I think I enjoyed the last part more because that's really important, how to talk to your parents and the patients about things and how to convey that information, right? That's really important because we may be good clinicians measuring things, and we are, but the conveying is most important. They are, at the end of the day, they are going to do these treatments and things like that. So thank you.
The body language, the facial expressions, and all those things, the nonverbals. I learned a lot of that content from Dr. Steve Vargo, if you ever are interested in learning more about it.
Sure. Wonderful. So one of the questions which came in, and it's more like a clinical oriented question, is the measurement of axial length. We do measure the anterior posterior axial length for monitoring and measuring. Any idea about the height of the eyeball? Does that play a role, or any studies or anything which you might be aware of in that sense?
Yeah, so the height from the inferior to the superior, I don't believe changes with growth. Theoretically, it should. There's some space in the socket for it to grow vertically as well. But I don't believe that impacts those 4 retinal or the 3 retinal things that we discussed with glaucoma, myopic maculopathy, retinal detachment. So likely less important and less dramatic than the anterior posterior growth. Okay, all right. And I think one question which just came in, I was not able to put on the slide, what would be your to-go treatment for myopia management? Do you have a to-go treatment that, I see this patient, this is what I'm going to suggest to all my patients? Right. I think many would agree when you look at the efficacy by age is the strongest determinant of progression. So you cannot compare 2 studies exactly because the distribution of ages is always a little different, and control groups can be a little bit different between studies as well. But you're going to look at the highest level of evidence, the randomized controlled trials and the systematic reviews. And typically what rises to the top is Ortho-K efficacy is very similar to MiSight, which is very similar to 0.05% atropine. And the IMI said if you have a regulatory approval on a device, to use that first if the child's a candidate, and to use the best peer-reviewed evidence next. Certainly, if the child swims every day as part of their sport, Ortho-K all the way. If they have astigmatism, yeah, you might have to go off label. You might have to do single vision toric with atropine, or some of the spectacle lenses you all have in Asia, Canada, Europe that we do not have. But yeah, I think, yes, it's still yet to be seen, I guess, how the DIMS and the Stellest will perform in multi-ethnic children. But most would say that, yeah, I think DIMS, Stellest, and SightGlass are right up there with 0.05% atropine. So I guess it comes down to lifestyle and regulatory and the candidate of the child. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And any thoughts over combination treatment? Do you think they work, or do you think there is a good amount of combination?
Yeah, there is a systematic review of Ortho-K with 0.01% atropine, and at least in the early stages, early like 1 year, it saves an additional 0.1 millimeters of axial growth comparing the two groups. So yes, there is evidence, high level of evidence that combination is additive. There's more benefit. But I think Pauline Cho showed maybe it's only in the first 6 months. So I think that if you are achieving your target emmetropic growth level, you take the myopic growth and now it's emmetropic again. You don't need to combo very often if you're choosing the right monotherapy. Yeah.
Correct. And one more clinical related question is the high order aberration related. So,
Yes.
we say that higher order aberration is useful sometimes, it's not useful sometimes. And it's kind of a debate, I would say. And and how is it related to the peripheral refraction or the axial length measurement? Any thoughts on this higher order aberration relationship with peripheral?
Yeah, it's been a debate here at Vision by Design and GMS and GSLS. At every conference, I think they debate how decentered your Ortho-K to induce coma, how much spherical aberration, is the shape of the curve. I showed a brief graph, most important is more ad power, really what it's all about. So I don't think you need to measure higher order aberrations in your treated children. I think there's going to be more studies on that rather than try to induce as much aberrations as you can, because then the quality of vision would suffer. And I think relating to the peripheral refraction, it's really I learned today, I think in the central 12 to 20 degrees. I know some of the studies measure peripheral refraction out to the 30 degrees either side, but really trying to get those cones in the posterior pole of the retina to see as much myopic defocus and aberrations as you can get away with. But we don't know exactly how much. Is it a threshold? Is it more the better? So sorry, I can't answer that completely.
Yeah, I think it's always this question pops up when it comes to higher order aberration. And I think probably more evidence is needed to kind of prove the fact for or against it.
Yeah. Can I answer the one about discussing myopia management with the child?
Yes,
quickly? Yeah. So I know many colleagues that wear fun socks for kids, or they have like a stuffed animal on the counter, or they have, the usual toys as fixation targets. But maybe it's an 8-9-year-old. You just want to, talk to them like an adult. You don't have to use like any special voice, but you really want to get to know them. What's the best part of their day? What's the best part of their activities in school? Get lower, right? So if your chair is a little bit high, don't stand over the child, right? Sit down and get really low so that the child's almost above you. And I think that really, from a nonverbal, conveys a lot of just like, here we are doing this together, right? And some people, they buy a prize when the child is able to insert and remove the contact lenses. But we tell the child, like, hey, you know, how did you do in your sport, in your hockey or your cricket or whatever the sport is on the 1 week follow up. And you really just want to see them smile and be very happy with the whole experience. And if they're scared, right? If they're scared, you can open a soft contact lens and put it on their finger and say, wow, this is so soft and squishy. And, or you can, for me, I wear corneal GP lenses, so I can actually take them out, put them back in. Like, yes, I know I made that look really easy, but you can do it too. So it's a lot of cheerleading and getting them excited. Like, your glasses won't fog anymore and you're not going to lose them. Or when you play dodgeball, it's not going to hit the side and you'll be, you know, all those sorts of things. Yeah.
So basically, we want to get them involved as well, rather than just
Yes.
talking to the parents, right?
Yeah. You want to talk to both of them. That question I said, do you know some eyes are longer than other eyes? That child, I think, would get really interested on that question. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think this topic also came up in our panel discussion on the previous weeks, and I think you were there as well. The panel for myopia management, and they also suggested that they ideally talk to the child and ask them to repeat sometimes, so that you are kind of
That's right.
that they are
understand.
getting the
Yeah.
information and understanding it, right?
Yeah.
So those are certain things which we can use as well. Correct.
Mhm.
Awesome. Great. So I think with that, we have taken the question which came up on the chat. And thank you so much again for, spending this Saturday evening
Yeah. Thank
with
you.
us and sharing that and conveying that message. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. We do have a session planned in October. So we'll get you the details onto our social media as well as onto the email. Until then, take care, be safe, and I'll see you during the next session. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a
Yeah.
good rest. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.